This first point is very important because it's foundational, but what happens when we are abused by others because we are autistic? What's going to happen? Well, I call this the turtle syndrome, or a better term is suppression. So when we are abused by others as people who are autistic, we have a couple options, fight or flight, and sometimes we can't physically, literally get away from the abuser. Maybe it's at the workplace. Maybe it's at school where you are compelled, forced by, force of government. You got to be there, or they send your parents to jail. So you have to be in the presence of an abuser. Well, how do you flee when you have to be there? Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a mother, father, maybe it's both, maybe it's a sibling, somebody you can't get away from, and you can't fight them. Well, you've got to flee, but there's nowhere to go because, you can't physically get away. The only way you can flee then is you have to retract into an emotional shell, just like a turtle. That's the only way you can protect yourself. So the way that I like to say this, are you with me? All right, because this is important, is intimidation breeds inhibition. So when we are intimidated, which is really kind of a polite term for being bullied by abusers, we either flee or we fight. And if literally fleeing is not an option, I mean physically getting out of the situation, then we are going to flee into ourselves. We're going to create that bubble. We're going to shrink into our shells. And there we are. It's kind of like being, to get away from somebody who is being abusive, physically abusive, maybe you can lock yourself into a closet. Because you can't get out of the building, out of the house, wherever you happen to be. And the only way you can get away from this guy, or maybe it's several people, you got to lock yourself in a closet. And if you come out, they're going to hurt you, so you stay in the closet. Think of the closet as an emotional closet or a shell. That is your defense. Well, what do you do? What do you accomplish? You got a closet. Do you have a closet in your house? We've got a couple of them, and I'm trying to imagine what I would do if I were, say there was a burglar in the house, and this guy was armed and dangerous, and he told me, if you come out of that closet, I'm going to shoot you. All right, so I go in the closet. I don't want to get shot. What am I going to do in the closet? I can't do anything. So when you are in an emotional closet, a shell, a bubble, or however you want to term it, what do? You can't do anything. So when anybody abuses you, either physically or emotionally because you are autistic, what they are doing is they are forcing you into a closet where you can do nothing. That's not a very comfortable way to live your life, to say the least. How do they abuse you? Well, it's through belittlement. It's through maybe verbal abuse. They actually hate you and get others to hate you. They may ridicule you. They criticize you. And a big one is lack of recognition at the workplace or at school.Maybe you can accomplish it, but they make sure you don't. They have this mindset, abusers. They have this mindset that nobody is going to get a leg up on them. Remember, in the past, we referred to this as the Possum Syndrome because there's no such thing, as a possum who goes to sleep or plays possum, pretends to be asleep for protection. So what is the possum doing? Well, there's this mechanism within his mind, or her mind, whatever the possum happens to be, that shuts down. Their brain they go comatose, catatonic. They just can't move. And it's natural. It's automatic. They don't make a decision to do this. It just happens. And I find that this is what happens to people who are autistic, many of us, when we are abused by others. Turtle syndrome. We retract into our shell, or I like to call it my bubble. Suppression is the word that we're using. Number two is, then We just stop trying. Now, imagine that there's this big bully guy, and now we're going to talk about being physical. He knocks you to the ground, knocks you to the floor. And you don't want to be on the floor because you got things to do, you got places to go, you got people to see, and so what you do is you get up off the floor. But he knocks you down again, over and over and over again. Finally, it occurs to you that you may as well not even try getting off the ground because he's just going to knock you down again until he just totally wears you out. So we quit trying. Now, when we have this sense of low self-worth or low sense of self-worth, however you want to say it, typically that is because we've been knocked to the ground so many times that we don't even know that we can get up. You've heard the story of the elephant, that was tethered to a peg. And the elephant didn't know that he or she could get up, and so, or they could walk away even after the tether has been cut. So they just stay there. We experience the same thing, same phenomenon. First of all, they won't allow us to get up because they keep knocking us down, figuratively speaking, emotionally speaking. And eventually we just think we can't get up. Well, but we can. I mean, we do have the ability, but in our mind, we have surrendered. Now, something that people who are involved in thought reform and brainwashing do, I have read, is they will make people confess, force them to confess to things they did not do. And if they don't confess, they get punished. So, all right, so the person says, I'm going to go ahead and confess even though I didn't really do this. I'm trying to get this cord out of my way. So the punishment will stop. And sure enough, the punishment stops. But then the abuser, the person who is the brainwasher, will bring the person back and make him confess to something else or to the same thing. They'll say, well, you didn't tell me the whole story. And if you don't confess again, there's more punishment. And they will do this over and over and over again, maybe up to 3 years. Now we're talking about people in concentration camps. And what they discovered, the reason they do this, is they discovered if you keep confessing to something you didn't do, within time, in most cases, you will come to believe you actually did it. So if someone is trying to get you to confess something, it doesn't matter what it is that you didn't do, don't admit it. Be defiant. Say, no, I didn't do that. My first experience with that, I think I was in first grade. And the teacher, who was a little bit abusive, decided that I had copied off of someone else's paper, that I cheated. So she called me to her desk, and she just flat out told me that I had cheated, I had copied, and she wanted me to admit it. And I didn't. I told her, no, I didn't. And she just kept after me until I broke down and cried and confessed to something. I'm 6 years old. What am I going to do? So I confessed to something that I knew I didn't do. But I knew I didn't do it. But if she had continued to do that over and over and over again, eventually, little kid, I would have come to believe that, yeah, I actually cheated. I actually copied, but I didn't. They will accuse us over and over and over until it's not that they won't allow me to get up. It's that I can't get up. In our mind, we think it's impossible. We don't have the ability. So imagine again that you're in a closet and you can't get out. What are you going to do in a closet? Nothing. Do you have a closet in your house? Imagine what it would be like to be locked in your closet. Burglar comes in, they got guns, burglars have guns, they lock you in a closet and tell you if you even try to get out, we're going to shoot you. Okay, so you stay in the closet, you don't want to get shot. What are you going to do in a closet? Can't go to work, can't call anybody. You can't do anything. Well, sometimes abusers of those of us who are autistic will mentally lock us into a psychological closet and we can't get out. And there's nothing we can do inside that closet. So the way that I like to say that is intimidation breeds inhibition. They intimidate us, we become inhibited, and that's the way we live our entire lives, in a shell, as a possum in a catatonic state. We are locked in a closet. We can't move. And another way to think of this is, let's say that you need to walk through a door. We walk through doors all the time. Well, what if someone, an abuser, has wired up the door handle, and if you touch it, you get shocked? The only way you can open the door is with a handle. You need to figure out a way to get that door open without touching the handle because, well, you're stuck in the closet. You got to get through that first door to get to the next door, and to get to the next door to get to the next door. And what happens is we find ourselves, as we said earlier, suppressed. We're locked in. We can't go anywhere. It's kind of like, you've heard the story, the longest journey begins with the first step. A lot of times abusers will not allow us to take that first step. So we're stuck. So we could have wasted decades. Years turn to decades, and decades turn to lifetimes. That we can't move forward in life. We have no fulfillment in life because as people who are autistic, we are abused and held back and held down. That is so frustrating. So when you get to those end of the life decades, where I'm there now, I'm in my 70s. For most people, it's the 70s, 80s. If they're fortunate, maybe into their 90s and beyond. But when you get to that stage in life, you may ask yourself, well, what if I could have moved forward? What if people hadn't held me back? What if I had not been forced into my shell, or into my bubble, or into the closet, or the catatonic state of a possum? What if I had my potential unleashed? That I was not psychologically tethered to a stake like an elephant? Where would I be today? What would I accomplish? Now you're thinking somebody in their 70s or 80s. Number 3 is mental exhaustion. So our abilities, our talents, whatever you want to call them, are suppressed, and that creates a negative self-image. Remember we said it moves from they won't let me to I can't do it. So we are suppressed. We embrace a self-image, even self-hatred that we think is real. And I said this in another video. What if you had never, ever encountered an abuser in your life? Born and raised like Tarzan in a jungle. All of those inhibitions would not be there, largely. Some of them may be innate, maybe genetic, but by and large, we have learned to be suppressed. We have learned to be intimidated, to be inhibited because of intimidation. So there is mental exhaustion, that self-image, even self-hatred. Number 4, speaking of inhibitions, what happens is our growth is stunted. We just can't move forward. They used to do this thing in some cultures where they would bind the feet of little children intentionally to make them helpless so that they thought they were helping them, to make them dependent on servants because they were royalty. They had to be waited on. Well, abusers will try to bind your feet, figuratively speaking. I guess we're using a lot of analogies in this presentation, but abusers will bind your feet so you can't move. And it lasts for life. When your mind is bound and you think you can't move, what happens is you don't develop in life. Your development is inhibited, and therefore you are never fulfilled. And there are people who are autistic, they never get married because they are intimidated and therefore inhibited. So they can't get out of their shell to meet somebody. The same thing is true in the workplace. It's not that they don't want to work or can't work. They got the talent, they got the ability, but they're inhibited because of the abuse of abusers who see people who are autistic as soft targets, low-hanging fruit, easy targets, wounded gazelle, as I like to say. Number 5 is, taking this a step further, is the impact. And the impact could be stress Well, it could be, it is stress. I can't think of an exception. Chronic stress that lasts for a lifetime. That anxiety that goes along with stress or causes stress. And not to mention lost opportunities. And as I said in another video, stress, anxiety can have physical manifestations. You can have a problem with autoimmune syndrome where I went through a period of nearly a year where I was just in pain all the time. In fact, I went about a year and I didn't make any videos at all. And so my YouTube channel suffered because of that. But I couldn't. You know, I was going through this time of autoimmune disorder, and they never did figure out what caused it. I think it was caused by stress. I don't know that for a fact, but I was inhibited. Physically inhibited. I mean, just in pain all the time. And finally we found a, what do you call them, a neurologist, somebody who prescribed a medication, and it was so frustrating because the medication that, I can't remember what it's called, it literally took effect in like a half an hour. So I went through all these months of that pain, and I could have been on the meds, and it had gone. And then after a few months, I got off the meds, and the problem had ceased. So anyhow, we have economic consequences. In my case, my YouTube channel suffered. Instead of having, you know, thousands of viewers, it went down to maybe a few hundred if I was fortunate, sometimes lower than that, because I wasn't able to do my job. And there's also this thing of emotional consequences, social consequences, so forth. So there are impacts, or an impact, if you want to say it collectively, of being abused if you are autistic. Okay, let's tie all this together. And let's think of it in these terms. I did a whole video on this, so I'm going to mention it very briefly. What if you could be the self you would have been if it had not been for the abuse of others? Now, a lot of people are not autistic. Neurotypical people who live in the hive mind, yeah, they have abuse, but they have a natural defense. They know how to deal with it because they live in the hive mind, they are born in the hive mind, they are genetically predispositioned to deal with these things. We're not. But what if you have not been? Now, you may have had other consequences, but, you know, I did a video on what if you were born in the jungle, had no contact with people whatsoever. You wouldn't have had any of these intimidations, which breed inhibitions. None of them, at least not from other people. So some people use the expression, you lose your voice. That is to say, you lose your sense of identity, lose who you are, but also sometimes you literally, or at least I do, literally physically lose my voice. For example, earlier today, I was taking my daily walk. You know, I got to walk for 3 miles. Sometimes I jog or whatever. And I encountered another person out taking a walk, and I tried to speak to them, and, you know, that scrambling in your brain that is there innately, it manifests in the way that I talk sometimes. When I was younger, it was all the time. But as I got older, I learned little tricks, techniques to try to control it. But still, here I am in my 70s. And I literally lost my voice in that I could not speak clearly to this person. Say, hey, how you doing? How hard is that? Well, you can't do it. So the fact of the matter is, as we tie all this together, we have to understand that our potential and consequently our fulfillment in life is being surrendered. It's being stolen from us. It's being taken away from us by people who are abusers simply because we're easy to abuse. Somehow, some way, we need to find a way to get beyond that abuse, and sometimes it may require professional help. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.